The letter was sitting on the desk between us when the investigator finally looked up and asked, "Have you ever been diagnosed with this condition?" I looked at the page again. My full name was printed at the top. My date of birth was correct. Even the name of my doctor appeared beneath the statement. But the diagnosis was not mine. I had never been told I suffered from the condition described in that letter. I had never been treated for it. And as far as I knew, my doctor had never written anything like this. "No," I said. The investigator did not answer right away. She simply folded her hands over the file and studied me for a moment. Then she asked, "Did you authorize anyone to submit this document on your behalf?" "No," that was all I said. I had learned by then that there was no reason to fill silence with explanations. The more I looked at that letter, the more I understood that someone had gone to extraordinary trouble to make me look incapable of managing my own life. And my money. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. A printer sat against one wall. A closed laptop rested beside another stack of documents. Everything about the office felt ordinary. The situation was not. The investigator turned another page. "This was submitted in connection with an old power of attorney," she said. My stomach tightened. I knew exactly which document she meant. An old power of attorney I had signed years earlier. A document I had almost forgotten existed. For a moment, I said nothing. There was something strange about hearing those words in that room. Something that made several earlier conversations suddenly line up in my mind. Questions about my accounts. Questions about my passwords. Questions about my health. Questions about where I kept important documents. At the time, I had told myself my family was simply being concerned. I had been wrong. But this is where the story really began. Not with the letter. Not with the investigation. And not even with the money. It began years earlier when I still believed that being the responsible person in a family was something to be proud of. I worked hard. I saved carefully. I planned for retirement. I paid my bills on time, kept my records organized, and tried to help whenever someone in my family needed it. That was simply what family did, or at least what I believed it did. When someone needed help, I helped. When someone was short on money, I found a way to contribute. When my younger sister had another problem, I listened. I never thought of those things as sacrifices. Not then. My mother certainly never called them sacrifices either. She called them love. She would smile and say, "Family takes care of family." And I believed her. For years, that sentence made me feel needed. Later, it would make me question how much of my life had actually belonged to me. The investigator closed the file for a moment. "We contacted your doctor's office," she said. I looked at her. She continued carefully. "They have no record of this letter." Something inside me went very still. I had suspected it. But hearing it from someone outside my family made it real. Someone had used my name. Someone had used my doctor's name. And someone had tried to use an old legal document to gain control over my finances. I still did not know how far they had planned to go. I still did not know who would be held responsible. And I certainly did not know how many people had already been told that I was the problem. But I knew one thing. This was no longer a disagreement about money. It was an attempt to take control of my life while convincing everyone else that they were only trying to help me. The investigator opened the file again. "There is something else you should know," she said. I waited. She placed another document on the desk. And when I saw the name attached to it, I finally understood why my mother had started asking questions months before. The old power of attorney had not been forgotten by everyone. The sentence sounded harmless when my mother said it. "We're family. You know how this works." I remember standing in her kitchen, holding a cup of coffee I had already forgotten to drink. At the time, I thought she was asking for help. I did not understand that she was talking about my money as if it already belonged to all of us. My younger sister had another business idea. It was not her first one. She had tried several things over the years. Some had lasted a few months. Others had disappeared almost as quickly as they started. There was always a new plan, a new opportunity, and a new reason why this time would be different. This time, according to my mother, she just needed a real chance. I had spent years building that chance for myself. I worked. I saved. I avoided unnecessary debt. I put money into retirement accounts and kept emergency savings because I had learned early that nobody could guarantee what tomorrow would bring. I was not rich. I was careful. There was a difference. My savings had not appeared because I was lucky. They came from ordinary decisions repeated for years. I skipped things I wanted. I worked when I could have rested. I planned ahead while other people around me lived from one emergency to the next. And whenever my family needed something, I helped. I paid bills when someone was short. I contributed when an unexpected expense appeared. I helped my sister more times than I could remember. I never kept a spreadsheet of favors. I never asked anyone to pay me back for every small thing. That was partly because I loved them. It was also because my mother had taught me that keeping score was wrong. Family doesn't keep score, she used to say. When I was younger, those words had sounded warm. They made generosity feel natural. They made me believe that if I had more than someone else, I should share without thinking twice. So when my sister announced her latest business plan, I listened. My mother did most of the talking. She explained how promising the idea was. She talked about customers, potential profits, and how unfair it was that my sister had never been given a proper opportunity. Then she looked at me. You could help her get started. I knew what she meant. How much? I asked. My mother named an amount that made me stop drinking my coffee. It was not a small contribution. It was money I had spent years saving. Money that was supposed to support me later in life. That's my retirement, I said. My mother sighed as though I had made things unnecessarily difficult. You have enough. I remember looking at her. Enough. That word stayed with me. Enough for what? Enough to retire? Enough to survive an emergency? Enough to start over if something happened? Or simply enough that everyone else felt comfortable asking for more? My sister sat nearby, staring at her phone. She did not argue with me directly. She didn't have to. My mother was doing it for her. She just needs a start, Mom said. I understand, I replied. Then help her. I'm not giving her my retirement savings. The room became quiet. My sister finally looked up. Her expression changed first. Then my mother's did. It was a small shift, but I noticed it. Disappointment became offense. Suddenly, I was no longer the dependable daughter who always helped. I was the selfish one. My mother reminded me of everything the family had done for me. She mentioned sacrifices. She mentioned difficult years. She mentioned how much easier things would be if I stopped thinking only about myself. I listened. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult my sister. I simply repeated the same thing. No, that one word seemed to bother them more than an argument would have. My sister eventually left the room. My mother stayed behind. She looked at me with the tired expression she used whenever she wanted me to feel guilty. You're really going to let her fail? I looked down at my coffee. I'm not responsible for making her business succeed. My mother said nothing. But the conversation did not end there. It only became quieter. Over the next few weeks, the questions started. At first, they seemed normal. How much had I saved? Which company managed my investments? Did I still use the same bank? Where did I keep my important documents? I answered some questions casually. Others I ignored. Then my mother asked something that felt different. Do you still have that old power of attorney? I looked at her. She smiled. I'm just asking. I told her I wasn't sure. That was true. At least, it had been true at the time. I did not know that she remembered the document better than I did. I did not know that my refusal to fund my sister had changed something inside my family. And I certainly did not know that the questions about my money were not really questions at all. They were preparation. At the time, I still thought the worst thing my family could do was make me feel guilty for protecting my own future. I would soon learn that they had imagined something much more serious. Because once my money was no longer available by choice, someone began looking for a way to make the choice for me. The question came so casually that I almost missed what was wrong with it. Do you still use the same bank? My mother asked it while standing at the kitchen counter, rinsing a plate. She did not look at me when she said it. That was what made me notice. I had heard questions like that before, but never all at once. Now they were coming from different people, in different conversations, always wrapped in something ordinary. My sister asked how my investments were doing. My mother asked whether I still received paper statements. My father asked if I had updated my emergency contacts. Then came questions about my passwords, my medical appointments, my retirement account, the location of my important documents. Individually, none of those questions seemed dangerous. Together, they formed a pattern. And once I noticed the pattern, I could not stop seeing it. I started paying closer attention to the way my family spoke around me. My mother would mention my finances and then quickly change the subject. My sister became strangely interested in whether I was stressed. My father asked once if I had been sleeping well. I remember smiling and telling him I was fine. He nodded, but he looked relieved in a way that made no sense. That was when I stopped assuming everything was innocent. I did not confront anyone. I had spent too many years trying to keep family arguments from becoming family wars. Instead, I began writing things down. Dates, questions, messages, small details that might have meant nothing, or might have meant everything. A few days later, I took the information to the attorney I trusted. I expected her to tell me I was overthinking it. She didn't. She listened without interrupting while I explained what had happened with my mother, my sister, and the sudden interest in my finances. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair. "Do you have an old power of attorney?" she asked. I looked at her. "I might." "When did you sign it?" "Years ago." "Do you know whether it was ever revoked?" I paused. "No," she nodded slowly. She did not look frightened. She did not look surprised. That was almost worse. "What?" I asked. She folded her hands on the desk. "I'm not saying anyone has done anything wrong," she said. "But if you are concerned about someone having authority over your finances, we should make sure the old document cannot be used against your wishes." I stared at the folder in front of me. The word authority suddenly felt heavier than it ever had before. Until that moment, a power of attorney had always sounded like paperwork. Something you signed once and forgot about. Now I understood that paperwork could outlive trust. My attorney asked me to search through my records. That evening, I went home and opened the cabinet where I kept old financial documents, tax returns, insurance papers, bank statements, retirement information. Everything was labeled. I had always been organized. That habit had never seemed important before. That night, it mattered. After nearly an hour, I found the document. There it was. My old power of attorney. I sat at the table and read it carefully. The person named in it was someone I had once trusted completely. And suddenly, several conversations from the past few weeks sounded different. The questions about my bank. The questions about my health. The questions about where I kept my documents. None of them proved anything. But together, they made me uncomfortable enough to act. I called my attorney. "I found it." There was a short pause. "Good," she said. "Bring it in tomorrow." I did. She reviewed the document while I sat quietly across from her. Then she looked up. "You don't need to accuse anyone," she said. I wasn't planning to. Good. Protect yourself first. Ask questions later. That sentence stayed with me. Protect yourself first. For years, I had done the opposite. Whenever something threatened the peace in my family, I was usually the one who adjusted. I gave more. I stayed quiet. I let things go. I convinced myself that keeping everyone comfortable was a form of love. But my attorney was teaching me something I had never learned at home. Boundaries did not require anger. They required action. So I started making changes. Quietly. I reviewed my accounts. I checked my beneficiaries. I examined who had access to my financial information. I updated security details. I made sure my attorney knew exactly where my important documents were. And I told no one in my family what I was doing. Not my mother. Not my sister. Not my father. My silence was not fear. It was a decision. If someone was planning to use my trust against me, I did not need to warn them that I had stopped trusting them. For several days, nothing happened. Then, one evening, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my mother. I opened it expecting another question about my sister's business. Instead, I read something that made my hands go still. She asked whether I had been feeling confused lately. I read the message twice. Then a third time. Confused. That was a strange word. Too specific. Too carefully chosen. I placed the phone face down on the table. For the first time, I understood that the questions about my money might have been only the beginning. Someone was no longer trying to convince me to give my money away. Someone might be preparing to convince other people that I was incapable of keeping it myself. I left exactly $8.50 behind. Not $8. Not 10. $8.50. I knew exactly how strange that would look if anyone ever noticed. That was partly why I chose it. The rest of the reason went back to a memory I had not thought about in years. But before I got to that number, I had work to do. My attorney had been clear. Don't confront them, she told me. Change what needs to be changed first. So I did. Quietly. The first thing I handled was the old power of attorney. I formally revoked it and made sure the appropriate financial institutions had the updated documents. I did not call my mother. I did not call my sister. I did not announce what I was doing. I simply removed the authority I no longer wanted someone else to have. Then I changed my account security information. Passwords. Security questions. Contact details. Account alerts. Every small door that could possibly give someone access to my financial life was checked. I treated it like locking every window in a house after realizing someone had been walking around outside. There was no drama. No shouting. No family meeting. Just paperwork. And for the first time in a long time, paperwork made me feel safe. Then came the biggest step. I moved nearly all of my savings into a new account under my sole control. I reviewed every transfer carefully. I checked every number twice. I kept copies of everything. The money represented years of work, and I was not going to move it carelessly just because I was afraid. I wanted a clean record. A clear timeline. Something that could not be easily misunderstood later. When the transfers were complete, I looked at the balance of the old account. $8.50. I stared at the number for a moment. Then I smiled. Not because I was trying to punish anyone. Because I remembered. I was a child when my sister took exactly $8.50 from me. Back then, that amount felt enormous. I had saved it little by little. Coins. Small bills. Money given to me for helping around the house. I kept it in a little envelope because I wanted to buy something for myself. One afternoon, the money disappeared. I knew my sister had taken it. When I confronted her, she denied it at first. Then my mother stepped in. I remember standing there, upset and confused, waiting for my mother to make things right. Instead, she looked at me and said something I never forgot. Family doesn't keep score. I gave up. Not because I believed her. Because I was young. And because I wanted peace more than I wanted $8.50. Years later, I understood what that moment had taught me. It taught me that my things could become someone else's things if I was willing to stay quiet. It taught me that being generous was expected. And it taught me that objecting made me the difficult one. So when I saw that number on my screen, I did not see a childhood grudge. I saw a boundary. $8.50 was all I was willing to leave where someone else might think they had a claim. Everything else belonged where it had always belonged. With me. I finished the changes and closed my laptop. For the first time since my mother asked about my money, I felt calm. Not happy. Not relieved exactly. Just prepared. I still did not know whether my fears were justified. Maybe my family would stop. Maybe my sister would find another way to fund her business. Maybe my mother would eventually accept that my savings were mine. I wanted to believe that. But I had stopped depending on hope. I depended on documents. That night, I went through the records one more time. The revoked power of attorney was there. The new account information was there. The transfer records were there. Everything had a date. Everything had a trail. I placed the documents in a secure folder and locked them away. Then I went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a phone call from my investment company. The woman on the other end sounded professional. Careful. She asked me to confirm my identity. I did. Then she asked a question that made the room around me suddenly feel very quiet. Did you recently authorize someone to make a request concerning your ability to manage your account? I sat down. No, I said. There was a pause. The woman took a breath. That's what we thought. My hand tightened around the phone. What request? Another pause. Then she said there was documentation they needed to discuss with me. I looked toward the locked cabinet where I had stored my legal papers. The changes I had made were supposed to protect me. Now someone was trying to get around them. I did not know yet what they had submitted. I did not know whose name was on it. But I knew the next step would tell me whether I had been paranoid, or whether my family had already crossed a line I could never uncross. The investment company did not call to ask for money. They called to ask whether I had authorized someone to question my ability to manage it. I sat at my kitchen table with the phone against my ear, looking at the folder where I had placed every document after changing my accounts. For a few seconds, I said nothing. Then I asked, what exactly was submitted? The woman on the phone spoke carefully. There is documentation connected to a request concerning your financial authority. We are reviewing it because it does not appear to match the current records we have on file. I closed my eyes. My attorney had warned me not to assume the worst. But my family had spent weeks asking about my finances. My mother had asked whether I was confused. And now someone was questioning whether I could manage my own money. I already knew this was bigger than my sister's business. I did not authorize it, I said. We understand, the woman replied. That's why we're contacting you directly. She asked me to provide copies of the updated documents. I did. I sent the revoked power of attorney. I sent the newer paperwork. I sent the records showing that I had moved my money into the new account under my own control. I answered every question honestly. Then I waited. Waiting was becoming familiar. It was also becoming useful. Because while my family talked, the documents kept building a story of their own. A few days later, the atmosphere around me changed. Not directly. Nobody came to my door. Nobody accused me of anything to my face. Instead, messages began appearing from relatives I rarely heard from. One cousin asked if I was doing okay. Another said my mother was worried about me. Someone else mentioned that I had been under a lot of stress. I read the messages carefully. They all sounded concerned. Too concerned. And none of them asked what had actually happened. That was when I understood something important. Someone was telling a story about me. I just wasn't the person telling it. My mother had always been good at sounding reasonable. She could turn an argument into a concern. She could make pressure sound like love. And now, apparently, she was telling people that she was worried about my state of mind. I did not respond to the rumors. I did not call everyone in the family and explain myself. That would have created exactly the kind of emotional fight I was trying to avoid. Instead, I saved every message. I kept every email. I wrote down who contacted me and when. My attorney approved. Keep documenting, she told me. That's all. For now. I almost laughed. After years of trying to solve family problems with conversations, it felt strange to solve this one with records. But records did not get emotional. Records did not change their story halfway through a conversation. Records did not forget what they had said. My father called one evening. His voice sounded tired. I think everyone needs to calm down, he said. I was sitting on the edge of my bed. Calm down about what? There was a long pause. You know what I mean. No, I said quietly. I don't. He sighed. Your mother is worried. Your sister is worried. Maybe you should stop making things worse. I looked at the wall. I had heard those words before. Stop making things worse. They usually meant stop asking questions. Stop setting boundaries. Stop making other people uncomfortable. I asked him one question. What exactly did I do? He did not answer. Instead, he said, maybe you should just let Mom handle this. I felt something inside me go completely still. There it was. The same assumption again. My mother should handle my money. My mother should handle my decisions. My mother should decide what was best for everyone. I kept my voice calm. Handle what? Silence. My father finally said he had to go. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. I was no longer wondering whether my family was angry with me. They were. I was wondering what they were planning to do with that anger. The answer came sooner than I expected. The investment company called again. This time, the woman sounded more serious. "Our fraud department has reviewed the material," she said. I straightened in my chair. Fraud department? Yes. The word hung in the air. She explained that the documentation they received raised concerns about its authenticity and its intended use. I asked what document had caused the concern. There was another pause. Then she said, "A doctor's letter." I stared at the table. "A doctor's letter?" "Yes. It claims that you are suffering from a serious mental health condition and are unable to manage your financial affairs." For a moment, I could not speak. I thought about my mother's question. "Have you been feeling confused lately?" I thought about my father's call. "Let Mom handle this." I thought about the old power of attorney. And then I understood what they had been building. They were not simply trying to convince me to give my sister money. They were trying to create a version of me who could not say no. The woman on the phone continued. "We are verifying the letter with the medical provider." I looked toward the folder beside me. Every document I had saved suddenly felt heavier. I knew I had never received such a diagnosis. I knew I had never authorized such a letter. But I also knew someone had put it in writing. Someone had attached it to my name. And someone believed that piece of paper could give them control over my life. I thanked the woman and ended the call. Then I sat completely still. I did not cry. I did not call my mother. I did not call my sister. I simply opened my evidence folder and began adding the new information. For years, my family had told me that family did not keep score. Now, for the first time, I was grateful that I had kept records instead. Because the next question was no longer whether someone had crossed a boundary. It was who had forged the letter, and how much they thought they could get away with. My doctor had never seen the letter before. I knew that before the investigator finished explaining it. Still, hearing the words out loud made the situation feel different. Until then, there had always been a small part of me wondering whether I had misunderstood something. Maybe my mother had acted out of fear. Maybe my sister had pushed too hard. Maybe someone had made a terrible mistake. But mistakes did not usually come with a doctor's name attached to them. The investment company's fraud department had contacted my doctor's office directly. They asked whether the letter was genuine. My doctor said no. There was no confusion. No missing appointment. No forgotten conversation. No medical record that supported the diagnosis written on the page. The letter had simply not come from my doctor. Someone had created it. Someone had used a medical professional's name to make it look real. And someone had submitted it in an attempt to make me appear incapable of managing my own finances. I sat quietly while the investigator explained what they had found. I remember looking at my hands. They were completely still. That surprised me. I expected anger. Instead, I felt something colder. Certainty. The strange questions about my health. The questions about my bank. The old power of attorney. The sudden concern from relatives. The request involving my account. All of it was beginning to form one picture. I asked the investigator what I needed to do. "Keep everything," she said. "Everything. Messages. Emails. Documents. Account records. Anything connected to this." I nodded. "I have most of it." That answer seemed to matter. Because I had been careful. Not because I expected this. I was simply the kind of person who saved receipts, kept copies, and labeled files. For years, my family had teased me about it. Now those same habits were protecting me. My attorney helped me organize the records into a clear timeline. The old power of attorney was there. So was the document revoking it. The new account information was there. The transfer records were there. The messages from my family were there. And now there was the doctor's letter. We did not make guesses about who had created it. We did not make accusations that could not be proven. We simply placed the evidence in order. That was enough. The investigation could follow the trail. I remember my attorney looking over the documents and saying, "Let them do their job." I nodded. That was becoming my strategy. I would not chase my family. I would not threaten anyone. I would not try to win arguments around a dinner table. I would let the record speak. Outside the investigation, though, my family was doing the opposite. They were talking. My mother began calling relatives. I did not hear every conversation, but I heard enough. She said she was worried about me. She said I had changed. She said I had become suspicious of everyone. She said they were only trying to protect me. The words were carefully chosen. That was what bothered me most. They were not saying I had done something terrible. They were making me sound fragile, unwell, confused, the kind of person who needed someone else to make decisions for her. It was a dangerous story because it sounded compassionate. People believe concern more easily than accusation. A relative called me one afternoon. "I heard you're having a difficult time," she said. "I'm okay." There was a pause. "Your mother says she's really worried." "I know. Maybe you should talk to her." "I will when there's something to discuss." The relative did not know what to say after that. Neither did I. I was tired of explaining myself to people who had already chosen which version of the story they wanted to believe. My sister stayed quieter. That silence bothered me more than my mother's calls. She had wanted the money. She had benefited from the pressure. Now she seemed content to let everyone else explain what had happened. I wondered whether she knew about the letter. I did not know, and I refused to pretend that I did. That distinction mattered. I wanted the truth, not a theory. The fraud department continued its review. Then one afternoon, I received another call. The investigator told me that the medical office had confirmed something important. The letter was not simply unauthorized. The details inside it did not match my medical records. The dates were wrong. The diagnosis was unsupported, and the doctor had not signed it. I closed my eyes. For years, I had been the person who fixed problems quietly. I had paid bills, solved emergencies, covered gaps, protected feelings. Now I was watching my family create a problem that could not be fixed by a simple apology. The investigator asked whether I wanted to submit a formal statement. I said I needed to speak with my attorney first. After the call, I sat at my desk. The room was quiet. Outside, everything looked normal. Cars passed. Neighbors went about their day. Nothing in the world seemed different. But my life was different. The people I had trusted were now connected to an investigation involving my money, my legal documents, and a medical letter that had never been written. I still did not know exactly who had created it, but I knew the evidence was moving closer. And for the first time, I stopped asking myself whether my family would apologize. I started asking a harder question. What would happen when the truth became impossible for them to explain away? My mother did not ask me to forgive her. She asked me to lie for her. That was the first thing I understood when she sat across from me that afternoon, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked tired. Not frightened. Not ashamed. Tired. As if I had somehow created a problem that she now had to clean up. "I just want you to tell them it was a misunderstanding," she said. I looked at her. Tell them what was a misunderstanding? She shifted in her chair. The paperwork. There it was. The word she had chosen carefully. Paperwork. Not the forged letter. Not the false medical claim. Not the attempt to use an old power of attorney. Just paperwork. Something harmless. Something that could have happened by accident. I said nothing. My mother leaned forward. "Nobody was trying to hurt you." I looked down at the table. For years, that sentence had been enough to stop me from asking difficult questions. Nobody meant to hurt you. Family loves you. Family makes mistakes. Family doesn't keep score. I had heard versions of those words my entire life. But this time, they did not comfort me. They sounded like instructions. Forget it. Move on. Protect the family. Protect the person who crossed the line. My mother continued talking. She explained that everyone had been worried because I had become distant. She said my sister was under pressure. She said the business situation had gotten out of control. She said nobody understood how serious everything had become. Her voice grew softer. That was usually when she was most persuasive. "I was only trying to protect you," she said. I finally looked at her. "From what?" She paused. I waited. She did not answer directly. Instead, she said, "You know how much your sister is struggling." I almost smiled. Not because it was funny. Because even now, we were talking about my sister's problems. Not the letter. Not my account. Not the document. My sister. That was the center of everything. My mother wanted my money available. When I refused, they needed another reason for me not to control it. I kept my voice calm. "I didn't write the letter." "I know. You didn't ask my doctor to write it?" She looked away. "I don't know everything that happened." That answer told me more than an admission would have. I sat quietly. My mother reached across the table. "You need to tell them this was all a misunderstanding." I pulled my hand back gently. No, her face changed. "You don't understand what this could do to the family." "I understand. You could ruin everything. I didn't create this." She stared at me. For the first time, I saw something behind the sadness. Fear. Not fear for me. Fear of what would happen when other people discovered the truth. She started crying. I did not move. That was difficult. I had spent years responding to my mother's tears. I would apologize. I would soften. I would give in. But this time, I had something stronger than guilt. I had evidence. And evidence did not need to raise its voice. My mother eventually stopped crying. Then she became angry. "You're really going to do this to your own family?" I looked at her. "I didn't do this." She shook her head. "You've changed." Maybe I had. Maybe that was the whole point. I had stopped confusing obedience with love. When we finished, she left without getting the promise she came for. I watched her walk away through the window. I did not feel victorious. I felt exhausted. That evening, my father called. He did not ask what happened. He already knew. "I heard you met with your mother." "Yes," he sighed. "Why can't you just let this go?" I looked at the folder sitting beside me. Let what go? The whole situation. I said nothing. He continued. "Your mother is upset. Your sister is terrified. This is becoming bigger than it needs to be." I almost asked him how big he thought a forged medical letter was supposed to be. Instead, I asked one question. If the paperwork was innocent, why does everyone need me to lie about it? Silence. Longer this time. My father finally said, "I'm just asking you not to make things worse." I closed my eyes. That sentence hurt more than I expected. Because he was not asking the person who created the problem to stop. He was asking me to stop exposing it. After we ended the call, I sat alone in the quiet. I thought about my family. I thought about every time I had helped them. Every time I had stayed quiet. Every time I had chosen peace. And I realized something simple. Peace that depends on one person swallowing the truth is not peace. It is pressure. The next morning, I called my attorney. I told her what my mother had asked me to do. She listened. When I finished, she said, "Then you know what your next step is." I did. I would tell the investigators the truth. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted my mother punished. Not because I wanted to destroy my sister's future. I would tell the truth because the truth was the only thing left that belonged entirely to me. The statement was waiting on my desk. My name was at the bottom. I read every page carefully. Then I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed. And with that one signature, I stopped protecting my family from consequences they had chosen for themselves. I did not know what would happen next. But I knew the truth was finally moving without me. And somewhere beyond that quiet office, the people who had spent months trying to make me look incapable were about to discover just how carefully I had kept every record. My signature was only one line on a page. But when the pen left the paper, something inside me finally stopped fighting. For years, I had believed that keeping a family together meant absorbing the uncomfortable things. The guilt, the pressure, the arguments, the expectations. Now I understood that sometimes keeping yourself safe meant allowing other people to face what they had done. The investigator sat across from me with the statement in front of her. She did not rush me. She told me to read everything carefully and correct anything that was inaccurate. So I did. I gave them dates. I gave them names. I gave them copies of the documents. I explained when I had discovered the old power of attorney, when I had revoked it, when I moved my money, and when the suspicious paperwork first appeared. I did not guess. I did not exaggerate. I did not tell them what I thought my family had intended. I told them what I knew. That distinction mattered. Because the truth did not need help. It only needed to be preserved. The old power of attorney was examined first. The records showed that I had revoked it before the suspicious request reached the investment company. That meant whoever tried to rely on it was working from an outdated document. Then they examined the financial records. The timing was clear. My money had already been moved into a new account under my control. The transfer records were clean. There were no unexplained withdrawals. No missing funds. No secret transactions. Everything I owned was still where it belonged. Then came the doctor's letter. The investigator showed me a copy. I had already seen it before, but this time it felt different. Now there was evidence behind the words. The medical office had confirmed that the doctor had not written it. The dates did not match my records. The diagnosis did not appear in my medical history, and the doctor had not authorized the document. The investigator placed the findings into the file. I watched quietly. The story my family had been trying to create was beginning to collapse under its own weight. They had wanted a simple picture. A confused woman. An old power of attorney. Concerned relatives. A legitimate reason to intervene. But the records told another story. I had been managing my finances normally. I had recognized something was wrong. I had taken legal precautions. I had moved my money. And I had kept the evidence. The investigator looked at me. Did you authorize anyone to submit this letter? No. Did you ask anyone to take control of your finances? No. Did you ever tell your family you were unable to manage your own affairs? No. She nodded and wrote something down. Those 3 questions were simple. But hearing my answers recorded in that room felt important. For once, nobody was asking me to prove that I was a good daughter. They were asking what actually happened. Outside the investigation, the family story was beginning to change. Relatives who had previously called me unstable became quieter. Some stopped calling altogether. Others started asking questions. One cousin finally said, "I think I misunderstood what happened." I appreciated the apology, but I did not correct the past for them. They had believed what they were told. Now they could believe what the evidence showed. My sister was also beginning to face reality. Without access to my money, her business plans changed. She could no longer assume that I would rescue the next idea. For the first time, she had to make decisions based on what she actually had. I did not celebrate that. I had never wanted her to fail. I had only wanted her to understand that her future could not be built on my retirement. My mother, however, became harder to reach. She stopped calling me directly. Messages came through other relatives. Sometimes they were emotional. Sometimes they were angry. Sometimes they were carefully worded reminders about everything our family had supposedly done for me. I saved them all. Not because I wanted to use them against anyone. Because by then, I understood the value of a complete record. My attorney kept reminding me to stay quiet. "Don't argue with the family," she said. "Let the process finish." So I did. My silence had changed meaning. At the beginning, it had been the silence of someone trying to keep peace. Now it was the silence of someone who no longer needed to convince anyone. The evidence was doing that for me. Then the investigator called again. Her voice was more serious this time. "We've completed enough of the review to move forward." I sat down before she finished the sentence. She explained that the evidence strongly supported that the medical document was fraudulent. The attempted use of the old power of attorney was also part of the investigation. There would be formal consequences. I listened. There was no dramatic feeling. No sudden rush of victory. Just a deep breath. I had spent so long preparing myself for the possibility that nobody would believe me. Now people with no emotional connection to my family were looking at the same documents I had been protecting and reaching their own conclusions. That was the moment I finally understood something. Vindication was not hearing someone say, "You were right." It was knowing I no longer needed to say it myself. The record said it. The dates said it. The doctor said it. The financial company said it. And the truth had become too large for my family to control. I closed the folder and placed it back in my desk. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to think about something other than protection. I thought about what came next. My money was safe. My legal documents were updated. The investigation was moving forward. But my family was about to discover that consequences were not something they could talk their way out of. And somewhere in that process, I knew one final question would have to be answered. What happens to a family after the person they always expected to sacrifice finally stops sacrificing? The family finally got what they had always said they wanted. Everyone was paying attention. For years, my mother had told me that family problems should stay inside the family. Now there was nowhere left to hide them. The investigation moved forward, and the quiet pressure I had lived under began to change direction. My mother was facing the consequences of the forged medical document and the attempt to use an old power of attorney. I did not know every detail of what would happen next, and I did not need to. The people handling the matter had the documents. They had the dates. They had the medical records. They had the financial records. Most importantly, they had the truth. For the first time, I was not responsible for deciding what happened to anyone else. That was a strange feeling. I had spent so many years believing that if something went wrong in my family, I had to help fix it. Now, there was nothing for me to fix. I simply had to tell the truth and let the process continue. My sister's situation changed too. Without access to my savings, her business plans had to become smaller, more realistic. She could no longer talk about my money as if it were the safety net waiting behind every decision she made. She had to look at her own finances. She had to decide whether the business could survive without someone else carrying the risk. I heard through relatives that she was angry with me. Then I heard she was angry with our mother. Then I heard she was simply scared. I never knew which version was true. And eventually, I stopped trying to find out. I had spent enough time trying to understand other people's choices. I needed to understand my own. My father was quieter than everyone else. One evening, he called. His voice sounded different. There was no accusation, no warning, no request for me to make things easier. Just exhaustion. I thought I was protecting the family, he said. I sat at my kitchen table. You were trying to keep everyone together, I replied. He was silent. Then he said, Isn't that the same thing? I looked at the old account statement sitting beside me. No, I said. Not if keeping everyone together means one person has to keep getting hurt. He did not argue. That was the first time my father had not tried to convince me that peace was more important than the truth. The conversation ended quietly. Afterward, I sat there for a long time. I thought about all the people who had apologized. Some had called. Some had sent messages. A few admitted they had believed my mother's version of events. One relative said, I should have asked you before judging you. I appreciated the apology. But I also understood something. Trust does not return simply because someone says sorry. It returns slowly. Through behavior. Through consistency. Through boundaries. So I did not reopen every door just because someone knocked. I became much more careful about who had access to my personal information. My attorney helped me review everything again. Legal documents. Beneficiaries. Account access. Emergency contacts. Important records. I made copies and stored them securely. I created clear instructions for what should happen if I ever became unable to make decisions for myself. The difference was that this time, I chose the people who would have that responsibility. I did not leave it to assumptions. I did not sign something and forget about it. I understood what every document meant. That was one of the lessons I wished I had learned earlier. A signature could protect you, but only if you understood what you were signing. And trust was not a substitute for good paperwork. There was one thing I never changed. The old account still had $8.50. I could have transferred it. I could have closed the account completely. But I left it there. Not as revenge. Not as a message to my family. As a reminder. $8.50 was the amount my younger self had once been told did not matter. But it had mattered. Not because of the money. Because of what happened when I was told that my boundaries were less important than keeping everyone comfortable. For years, I had believed the lesson was that family should not keep score. Now I understood the real lesson. You can love people without giving them unlimited access to you. You can forgive someone without trusting them with your future. And you can care about your family without becoming responsible for their choices. My mother eventually faced the legal consequences of what had happened. My sister had to become financially independent. My father had to accept that protecting the family sometimes meant telling the truth about it. And I had to learn something too. Being the responsible one did not mean being endlessly available. It meant being responsible for myself as well. There was no dramatic celebration when everything settled. No moment when I stood in front of everyone and announced that I had one. I did not want one. The quiet was enough. My savings were still mine. My documents were protected. My future was still intact. And the people who had once assumed I would always sacrifice had finally learned that assumption was no longer true. But the strangest part came later. Months after the investigation began, someone contacted me with a story that sounded painfully familiar. They were worried about their own financial documents. They did not know who to trust. They were afraid of making the wrong decision. I listened. And for the first time, I realized that what had happened to me could become useful to someone else. The thing my family had tried to turn into my weakness had given me knowledge I never wanted but now knew how to use. That was when I understood that my story was not really about the money. It was about the moment a person finally decides that protecting herself is not selfish. And I was beginning to understand exactly what the $8.50 had been trying to teach me all along. I never spent the $8.50. For a long time, I thought that was strange. After everything that happened, I could have closed the old account completely. I could have moved every last dollar somewhere else and never looked back. But I left that small amount exactly where it was. Because by then, $8.50 no longer meant money to me. It meant a boundary. It meant the little girl I used to be, standing in the middle of a family argument, waiting for someone to tell her that what belonged to her mattered. Back then, I had believed my mother when she said family did not keep score. I believed that love meant giving without asking questions. I believed that if I was the responsible one, I should be the understanding one too. So I gave. I helped with bills. I helped when my sister's plans failed. I helped when someone had an emergency. And every time I told myself it was okay. Because family was supposed to take care of family. But somewhere along the way, something changed. Helping became expected. My savings became available in other people's minds. My responsibility became an obligation. And my boundaries became something they felt entitled to challenge. The hardest part was not losing trust. The hardest part was realizing that some people had never understood the difference between loving me and needing something from me. That realization stayed with me long after the investigation was over. My money was safe. My legal documents were updated. The old power of attorney was gone. My accounts were protected. But I knew that financial security was not only about having money in the bank. It was also about knowing who could access your information, who could make decisions for you, who could speak on your behalf, and whether the documents you signed years ago still reflected what you wanted today. I learned that lesson the hard way. So I started sharing what I had learned with other people. Not as an expert. Not as someone who had everything figured out. Just as someone who had seen how quickly trust could become dangerous when boundaries were unclear. I told people to understand their powers of attorney. To know where their important documents were. To review old paperwork. To protect account information. To make sure the people they trusted were actually the people they still trusted. Most importantly, I told them not to wait for a crisis. Because by the time someone is trying to take control of your finances, it may already be too late to discover what you signed years earlier. I wish I had understood that sooner. I also learned something about forgiveness. For a while, I thought forgiveness meant returning to the way things had been. It doesn't. You can forgive someone and still keep your distance. You can love someone and still say no. You can accept an apology without handing that person the keys to your future. That was especially difficult with my mother. She was still my mother. Nothing could change that. There were memories I could not erase, both good and painful. There were moments when I remembered being a child and believing she could make everything right. But I no longer needed her approval to know that I had done the right thing. That was freedom. Not winning. Not revenge. Freedom. My sister eventually had to build her own financial life. I hope she learned something from that. I hope she learned that a dream is still worth pursuing, but it has to belong to the person pursuing it. It cannot depend on another person's retirement. It cannot depend on guilt. And it cannot depend on taking control from someone who said no. As for my father, our relationship became quieter. Not perfect. Just more honest. One day, he asked me if I still had the old account. I smiled. Yes. How much is in it? I looked at him. $8.50. He stared at me for a second. Then he understood. He did not laugh. He simply nodded. Neither of us needed to explain what that number meant. It was the amount my sister had taken when we were children. It was the amount my mother had told me not to worry about. And years later, it became the amount I refused to give away. Not because $8.50 could change my life, but because I had finally learned that small boundaries become important when people keep crossing them. Looking back now, I do not think the real victory was keeping my savings. The money mattered. Of course it did. It represented years of work and the future I had planned for myself. But the greater victory was learning that I did not have to destroy myself to prove that I loved my family. Love should not require one person to sacrifice everything while everyone else benefits. Loyalty should not mean silence. And being responsible should never mean becoming responsible for every adult around you. I spent years believing that keeping peace was my job. Now I know better. Sometimes peace begins when you finally tell the truth. Sometimes protecting yourself is the most honest thing you can do. And sometimes the smallest number can carry the biggest lesson. For me, that number was $8.50. I kept it. I kept my savings. I kept my documents. And most importantly, I kept something I had given away for years without realizing it. My right to decide what happens to my own life. So let me ask you something. If someone in your own family expected you to sacrifice your savings, your peace, or your future simply because you were the responsible one, would you keep protecting the relationship, or would you finally protect yourself? Tell me in the comments. And if stories about betrayal, boundaries, family, and quiet vindication speak to you, subscribe. There are more stories waiting.